In 2017, the number of reported exorcisms increased by 400%. But here's what they don't tell you. The success rate dropped to just 60%. That means 4 out of every 10 exorcisms now fail. And when an exorcism fails, the consequences are catastrophic. Not just for the possessed, but for everyone involved. The 3 stories you're about to hear represent the worst failures in modern exorcism history. They're the reason the Catholic Church now requires 2 priests, a medical professional, and a psychological evaluation before any ritual can begin. They changed everything. Before we dive in, I need you to understand something. These aren't stories I'm making up for entertainment. These are documented cases. Cases that resulted in protocol changes, church closures, and in some instances, criminal investigations. The names have been changed, and the locations have been slightly altered for privacy. But the events are real. And they are disturbing. So if you're ready to hear what really happens when exorcisms go wrong, when the rituals fail, and the darkness wins, then stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why some priests now refuse to perform exorcisms altogether, why some have left the church entirely, and why the methods that worked for centuries suddenly stopped working in the 21st century. Let's start with the first story, the one that took place in a college dormitory. It was October 2014, and Sarah Mitchell was a sophomore at a small liberal arts college in rural Ohio. By all accounts, she was a normal student. Good grades, close group of friends, active in campus theater. But something changed during fall break. Her roommate, Jessica, noticed it first. Sarah stopped sleeping. Not insomnia, where you toss and turn and eventually drift off. I mean, she literally stopped sleeping for days. Jessica would wake up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and Sarah would be sitting upright in bed, staring at the wall, not moving, not blinking, just staring. When Jessica asked if she was okay, Sarah would turn her head very slowly and smile. But it wasn't Sarah's smile. She described it as too wide, like someone who'd never smiled before, trying to imitate the expression. Then came the voices. Sarah started speaking in languages she'd never learned. Her friends recorded some of it on their phones, thinking maybe she was having some kind of episode or breakdown. They played the recordings to a linguistics professor. He identified fragments of Aramaic, ancient Greek, and something he couldn't place at all. Something that didn't match any known language structure. The university brought in counselors. They thought it was a mental health crisis, maybe a psychotic break brought on by stress. But Sarah's behavior escalated. She started predicting things. Small things at first. She told Jessica that her mother would call at exactly 4:47 p.m. with bad news about her father. The call came at 4:47. Her father had been in a car accident. Sarah told another friend that the fire alarm would go off during their chemistry lab on Thursday at 10:23 a.m. It did. There was no fire, no explanation, just the alarm. Sarah's parents were devout Catholics. When they came to campus and saw their daughter, they knew something was deeply wrong. Sarah's mother had grown up hearing stories from possession from her grandmother in Poland
She recognized the signs: the lack of sleep, the languages, the knowledge of things Sarah couldn't possibly know. They contacted their parish priest back home, Father Thomas Beckwith. Father Beckwith was old school. He had been a priest for 40 years and had assisted in 3 exorcisms during his career. He agreed to evaluate Sarah. The university, desperate for answers and facing pressure from terrified students, allowed it. They cleared out a study room in the theology building and gave Father Beckwith access.
The evaluation lasted 6 hours. Sarah sat across from Father Beckwith, and for the first 2 hours, she was completely normal. Articulate, confused about why everyone was so concerned, apologetic for worrying people. But then, Father Beckwith began the formal questioning, the prayers, and Sarah changed. Her voice dropped 2 octaves, her posture shifted, and she looked at Father Beckwith with an expression he later described as ancient hatred. She told him things about his life, private things, sins he'd confessed only to God, doubts he'd never spoken aloud. She described his childhood bedroom in perfect detail, including a stuffed rabbit he'd hidden in his closet when he was 7 years old because his father said toys were for girls. Father Beckwith was convinced this was a genuine case of demonic possession. He contacted his bishop, explained the situation, and requested permission to perform an exorcism. The bishop was hesitant. The church had become cautious about exorcisms after several high-profile cases in the 80s and 90s had resulted in deaths, but Father Beckwith was insistent. The bishop gave conditional approval, with one requirement: a medical doctor had to be present. The university provided a doctor from the campus health center, Dr. Richard Chen. He was skeptical but professional. He'd document the proceedings from a medical perspective, ensure Sarah's physical safety, and intervene if necessary. The exorcism was scheduled for the following Friday night. Sarah's parents would be there. Jessica, the roommate, asked to stay. She felt responsible somehow. Father Beckwith agreed to let her observe from a distance. They prepared the room according to traditional protocols: holy water, blessed salt, crucifixes, sacred texts. Father Beckwith had performed the ritual before. He knew the Latin prayers by heart. He felt confident. That confidence was a mistake. The ritual began at 8 p.m. For the first hour, nothing dramatic happened. Father Beckwith read the prayers. Sarah sat in a chair restrained loosely with cloth straps for safety. She was quiet, almost peaceful. Dr. Chen monitored her vitals. Everything seemed normal. Too normal.
Then, at exactly 9:07 p.m., Sarah started laughing. Not the demonic growling laugh you hear in movies. This was her normal laugh, her actual laugh, the one Jessica recognized from late-night study sessions and inside jokes. And honestly, that made it so much worse. Sarah looked at her mother and said in her regular voice, "Mom, it's okay. I'm fine. This is silly. Can we please just go home?" Her mother started crying, torn between hope and terror. Was her daughter back? Was this real? Father Beckwith knew better. He'd seen this before. The deception, the attempts to stop the ritual by appearing normal. He continued the prayers, his voice growing louder, more insistent. That's when Sarah's body went rigid. Her back arched impossibly, her spine bending at angles that Dr. Chen stepped forward in alarm. He checked her pulse, 170 beats per minute. Her temperature was spiking. 102, 103, 104. He called for ice packs, worried about seizures, about brain damage. Father Beck was pushed forward. He made the critical mistake of assuming he was in control, that his faith, his experience, his authority would be enough.
He commanded the demon to reveal its name. In traditional exorcism theology, knowing the demon's name gives you power over it. It's a crucial step. Sarah's head turned toward him, and in a voice that didn't belong to her or to anything human, she spoke. But she didn't give her name. She gave his full name. The name he'd been given at baptism, that he'd never used, that wasn't on any documents, that only his deceased mother had ever called him. And then she gave him a choice. Stay, and she burns from the inside. Leave, and she lives. You have 30 seconds. Dr. Chen was already yelling about Sarah's temperature, 105, 106. Her skin was turning red, steam rising from her body. The cloth restraints were beginning to smoke. Jessica screamed. Sarah's mother collapsed. Father Beckwith faced an impossible decision. The ritual was supposed to work. Decades of church tradition said if you follow the protocols, you could cast out any demon. But Sarah was dying in front of him. He could see it, feel it. He stopped. He put down the holy water and stepped back. And the moment he did, Sarah's body relaxed. Her temperature dropped. Within 2 minutes, she was unconscious but breathing steadily. But Sarah never woke up. Not really. She was in a coma for 3 days. When she regained consciousness, she had no memory of anything. Not the possession, not the exorcism. She seemed completely normal. Except for one thing. She couldn't sleep anymore. Ever. To this day, Sarah Mitchell has not slept a single night. She's been studied by sleep researchers, neurologists. There's no medical explanation. Her body just doesn't need sleep. It's as if whatever was inside her changed something fundamental about her biology before it left. Or maybe it never left at all. Maybe it just went quiet. That was the first story, the one that made the church realize their protocols needed to change, that a single priest shouldn't face a possession alone. But it wasn't the most disturbing case. That distinction belongs to our second story, the one from Louisiana. In March 2016, Marcus Thibodeau was serving a life sentence at Louisiana State Penitentiary. He was 34 years old, a model prisoner. Quiet, kept to himself, spent most of his time in the prison library studying theology. But something happened during Lent. Marcus stopped attending chapel. His cellmate, Jerome, noticed Marcus would stand facing the corner of their cell for hours, whispering to himself. When Jerome asked what he was saying, he told him he was praying, but Jerome said it didn't sound like any prayer he'd ever heard. The prison chaplain, Father Luis Mendoza, tried to reach out. One day, Marcus showed up at Father Mendoza's office. He looked exhausted. Deep circles under his eyes, his hands shaking. He told Father Mendoza that something was inside him, something that had been waiting. He said it spoke to him in his sleep, told him things about the other inmates, about the guards, and about Father Mendoza himself. Father Mendoza asked what kind of things. Marcus leaned forward and whispered something that made the priest's blood run cold. Marcus described in perfect detail a confession Father Mendoza heard 3 weeks earlier from another inmate, a confession about a murder that police didn't even know was a murder. There was no way Marcus could have known it was a sealed room. Just Father Mendoza and the inmate, no one else. The diocese sent Father Raymond Clark, a Vatican-trained exorcist. The evaluation confirmed Father Clark's worst suspicions. Marcus knew things he shouldn't. He spoke Latin phrases from ancient texts. And the most disturbing, the physical strength. During one session, while handcuffed and shackled, Marcus broke a steel table bolt with his bare hands. Father Clark recommended a formal exorcism. It was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late April, inside the prison. The exorcism began at 9 a.m. Marcus was restrained in a reinforced chair. For the first 2 hours, he was calm. But at 11:15, something shifted. Marcus stopped responding. His eyes rolled back, and when they returned, there was someone else looking out. The entity laughed, and then it did something unprecedented. It started calling out names of other inmates. As it spoke each name, something happened to that inmate wherever they were in the prison. One man collapsed in the cafeteria with a seizure, and others started screaming in his cell, clawing at his face. A third attempted to hang himself. The prison went into lockdown. Guards were running everywhere. The intercom was chaos. And in the segregated cell, Marcus was smiling. The entity wasn't just possessing Marcus. It had influence over the entire prison. Father Clark deviated from the ritual. He called in other priests by phone to form a remote prayer circle. 6 priests, 3 states, all praying simultaneously. And then at exactly 12:03 p.m., every light in the prison went out. Everything. Backup generators failed. Security systems died. In the sudden darkness, Father Clark heard Marcus speak. But it wasn't the entity, the voice, anymore. It was Marcus. Terrified. Human. Father, it showed me things. It showed me what I am. And Father, I deserve this. I deserve to be its home. Because I invited it in years ago. I asked for power, and it gave me power. And now it won't leave because I don't really want it to. The lights came back on. The possession was gone. But Marcus wasn't relieved. He was devastated. Because that's what Father Clark discovered. Marcus hadn't been an innocent victim. He had been a partner. The armed robberies, the violence, it had all been a collaboration. Marcus died 6 months later. Suicide in his cell. Father Clark still believes the exorcism was successful. The entity was cast out. But he also believes that some people can't survive the absence of what possessed them. When the darkness leaves, sometimes there's nothing left inside. And there is one more detail Father Clark doesn't talk about.
Father Clark's haunting thought that we walk past possessed people every day brings us to our final and most tragic story. The case that finally forced the Vatican to completely restructure its laws. In January 2022, 19-year-old Anna Kowalski, a devout girl from Poland, began having terrifying visions of hell. She stopped eating. She stopped bathing. She would kneel in prayer until her knees bled. Her family contacted an experienced exorcist, Father Nowak. After a week of observation, his diagnosis was controversial. Anna wasn't possessed, she was oppressed. A spiritual attack, yes, but one that required therapy and prayer, not a ritual. But her family didn't want therapy. They wanted a cure. Against advice, they hired a different priest, Father Zielinski, known for his aggressive methods. He performed the exorcism in Anna's bedroom. No doctors, no oversight. For 48 hours, he denied her food and water and sleep, believing the demon was using her physical needs as a shield. By Sunday morning, Anna wasn't just delirious, she was dying. When she went into cardiac arrest from severe dehydration, Father Zielinski refused to stop praying. Anna died that afternoon. She was 19. The aftermath was catastrophic. Father Zielinski was arrested for negligent homicide. But the real horror came 6 months later. Anna's younger sister Kasia started mimicking Anna's symptoms, the visions, the starvation. The family was terrified. Was the demon jumping bloodlines? They went back to Father Nowak. He didn't perform an exorcism. He prescribed therapy and medication for PTSD. 2 years later, Kasia is alive and healthy. It wasn't a demon. It was grief. These 3 cases changed everything. Sarah's story proved that sometimes the entity is stronger than the ritual. Marcus's story proved you can't save someone who invites the darkness in. And Anna's story proved that the greatest danger isn't always the demon. Sometimes it's the exorcist. Because of Anna, the Vatican issued new protocols in 2022. Now, medical professionals must be present, because the Church finally acknowledged a dark truth, that in trying to fight evil, we become the instrument of harm. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. The world is strange, and possession might be real, but if you or someone you love is suffering, call a doctor first, because good intentions aren't enough. And as we learned with Anna, faith doesn't make you invincible. If these stories chilled you, hit the like button and let me know in the comments. Do you believe possession is real, or is it all in the mind? I read every comment. Subscribe if you want to see more deep dives into the dark side of history. Stay safe out there.